Hello, welcome to Technically Analytics. Today we're going to be talking about offensive disruption. Now, offensive disruption in baseball encompasses any strategy or play by the offense that makes the defense react unpredictably or ineffectively, therefore gaining an advantage. Now, what is offensive disruption? Now, I just read the definition, but what players come to your mind when you hear the phrase? When I think of offensive disruptor, I think of a good leadoff hitter or maybe a speed guy. Given the formula which is on screen right now, I would say a player that has good play discipline can draw walks would be like the ideal offensive disruptor. A guy that can steal, speed guys, uh, and so you might be tempted to think that an offensive disruptor is someone who can hit home runs and create offense, but this stat doesn't measure offensive firepower because it only takes into account total bases, which includes bases gotten in walks and hit by pitches. Metrics such as OPS plus and weighted runs created plus will measure offensive firepower much more effectively because these are metrics that are meant to measure that, and rather than this metric is meant to measure the guys that are basically think of it as like in tennis when you have like a force error. It's basically a force error. So offensive disruptor, but I can't talk today. Offensive disruptor measures the ability of a player to force the defense into mistakes. Walks, hit by pitches, steals are all mistakes allowed by an opposing pitcher slash defense. The idea of an offensive disruptor isn't a new one in baseball, but the creator of this stat, which we'll get into in a second, his name is Darren. He did some preliminary calculations using mostly full career stats of retired players, and the results are fascinating, and we'll look at those in a moment. Then we'll turn our attention to some current players for which I did some of the calculations using a formula in Excel's spreadsheet. So yeah, that's what we're going to be doing in today's video. This is kind of a new stat, kind of interesting because it definitely measures something that hasn't really been measured in total. Like these stats don't get a lot of love that we're measuring. So yeah, let's get into it. Okay, so this is the guy, Darren, who gave me the idea to make this video. This is his tweet profile on Twitter. You can see that he has the formula here, and this is his second go around of it. He did some, there's no, as you notice here, there's no park adjustments or anything, but you could add those, I suppose, because it would give you a better idea about like what, like error to error and like, stuff like that. Because I think, just doing these baseline stats is it's kind of simplistic, but if you were to add in park factor and like, like a bit, like I was saying, if I replied to this tweet basically that if you were to make it on a scale of 100, like OPS plus, and scale it based on the average of everybody, kind of like that, it would be a much better, much more useful stat. But I think it's already pretty useful as it is. So this is a list of guys based on, he says they have about 10 years in the big, 6,000 plate appearances, and a score over 500. And obviously at the top, you have Babe Ruth, Barry Bonds, Ted Williams, Lou Gehrig, the guys you would think. Mickey Mantle, Martin McGwire, Larry Walker, pretty high. Manny Ramirez, Jim Thome, Frank Thomas. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. Alex Rodriguez at 600. Carlos Delgado, David Ortiz, Henry Aaron. Like, just... And it goes on for a long time. There's a lot of great players here. A lot of Hall of Fame talent. Mike Piazza. But the most interesting guys, in my opinion, are the ones that are not like really good. Obviously, those are the players that you want to look at as like, these guys are certified disruptors. They disrupt everything. These guys are certified MVP type players. But the guys that you really want to look at are the guys that are below 500, which is even more interesting than the guys that are above. Homer and Baker's quite the name. Johnny Damon on the list. Craig Biggio, Bobby Bonilla. I mean, Mets are still paying him, so at least he's on here, right? So the names below 500 include Adrian Beltre, which is interesting, Evan Longoria, but the really surprising ones are Tony Gwynn, Wade Boggs, Derek Jeter, Ichiro, Cal Ripken. A lot of these guys are part of the 3000 hit club, which is interesting. And of course, Pete Rose, one of the very lowest ones, actually. And you can see that he says here, greatest compiler of any athlete in any major professional sport. And that's kind of true because how is it that low when he has so many of everything, just so much of everything, right? And this is his original tweet with original calculations, but I think it was a little skewed. Ricky Henderson was obviously first, and then you can see the replies, and then basically if you keep going, this was a really interesting finding here too. And I kind of explored this a little bit in my spreadsheet. We'll get to it. Basically, Chris Davis, high strikeout guy. Chris Davis had an interesting career. He's very up and down, very well known for his strikeouts, and it kind of shows here. But the problem is the formula doesn't have any strikeouts. It doesn't have any like he says here, you can add the Ks and or you can deduct the Ks and add the sacrifice hits, sacrifice flies. I tried it. It doesn't seem to change a lot with guys that have a lot of career at bats, but I do think there is something to that. Like, adding Ks could make it more of a, like I said, more interesting because the pure power guys with high K rates would be exposed, and it would really, like I said here, expose the negative. It would be really more of like a positive play versus negative play ratio and outcome, because the guys that are always creating positive plays would be, above 500, and the guys that are always getting into negative plays would be below. And that includes, striking out. It's a negative play, positive play for the defense. So that's the tweet basically, and you can see this list on Twitter. And my Twitter is @technicallyanalytics12. If you want to follow me on there, sometimes I talk about baseball. And moving on to the spreadsheet that I made, I just did a few players. I don't want to go too crazy with it. It's kind of a janky thing. I'm not great at spreadsheet, but I know some stuff. And it's, you have the usual lines. I did it in order, total bases, walks, hit by pitches, stolen bases, caught stealing, double plays, plate appearances, and then this is the total of those, the first few up until from total bases to stolen bases, and then this is the total of caught stealing and double plays, plate appearances. When you have to subtract these four stats by these two, and then the subtotal, and then you divide by the plate appearances, and then you get the numbers. And you can see that these are just for current season, or in Acuna Jr.'s place, 2023, because he was injured last year. So I try to keep it within like 140 games, 50 games ish, or like at least 600 plate appearances, because I figured that, it wouldn't be fair to compare players that are doing like if they had 150 at bats, it's not fair to compare them with someone with 700 at bats or 600 at bats. So I kept it pretty commonly. There's one guy, Jose Caballero, that has 483, and you can see that obviously it didn't really help him, but I didn't notice that, like, it seems like if you have, it's not so much the negative stuff that kills you, it's the amount of plate appearances and the amount of total bases and stuff you add up during the season, because the guys with 400s that don't have a lot of negative stats on them don't necessarily have high ratings, right? Miguel Garcia, for example, his total bases based on balls hit by pitches 0, stolen bases are not all that high. Like, he doesn't have that crazy. It's not like he's Acuna or Judge or Soto. It's and he doesn't have a lot of negatives either. Only 7 double plays and only 9. So he's not. It's not like he's doing anything too crazy, but because of his lack of total bases and his amount of plate appearances, it means that he's just getting outs, basically. He's not causing the defense any mistakes necessarily. And then at the same time, so you can see like Acuna is one of the better players, 2023 version at least. I mean, that was an insane season, 73 steals, like that's crazy. And then Corbin Carroll's the guy that comes to mind for me. Because he's high steal guy, speed guy. I wonder what his career would be. I didn't do his career, but it would be probably similar to this, probably around the 500 mark. Really, really dynamic player. Really like the guy. And then I did some Mets players because I was just curious. Lindor, obviously 573, really good. And of course, there were some weird examples too. Like you have Judge and Soto, which aren't surprising. They're high because like a guy like Judge, he just hits the ball. He has a lot of double plays, but didn't get caught stealing, interestingly. So it gave him quite a high figure. And then you have weird guys like Arenado and Machado, who you would think they were pretty well. Arenado's taking a little dip in hitting this season, but you would think these guys would be pretty decent. Like they wouldn't be so like wouldn't be that bad, but I mean, they really didn't do well because, in part because of the double plays. Like high double plays seem to kill you if you don't have like a massive amount of like base hits or like total bases or walks, like some of these guys, So, and you can see here, it's just the double plays for Machado are killing him. 25 double plays with 2 caught stealing, only 11 steals. So that negates 27 of his 337 total, forced errors, basically forced mistakes, basically on the defense, and it hurts him. Like he should be. You would think Machado would be a 500 plus player because, he has a great bat, he can hit. He's pretty good at stealing. I mean, 11-2 isn't like the worst stealing ratio in the world, so you would think he would be way better. And then, of course, I did an experiment where I added in what Darren said. He said, oh, yeah, if you add, sacrifice flies and sacrifice hits, and you drop in minus Ks, I decided to pick Tony Gwynn. His figure was like 482 or something like that, I believe. It was something like that. Let's see. It was he was in 489, and then his figure with the new stats added in 459. So it really didn't help him, but I think in some cases it would help some guys because it would help the figures, especially if they have like low hit by pitches like Tony Gwynn has, or low walks, because again Tony Gwynn hit 3,000 hits, so he was always gonna. I think that's another factor that adds in, is like the more plate appearances you have and the more plate appearances you have, and the higher the stats you have, like it's harder to get the ratio to be, higher than 500, I think. Because, he had a very long career, but he was just always hitting the ball. And even though his bases are really high, his other stuff is not. And I think is just the amount of plate appearances also kind of affects it too. So anyway, that's offensive disruptor. I don't know. It's just an interesting stat, and I think there's potential for it to be something like that I could actually measure everyday players, and especially if you were to, like I was saying, baseline it against an average of the whole MLB, you could take that baseline and then you could use it to measure players against each other, because this is, it gives you like some idea of a representation of how good these guys are at being offensive disruptors. But I think you have to go by going by careers, kind of like, all right, yeah, but guys are at different places in their careers. But you want like an everyday kind of tool to measure if a guy is forcing mistakes on the defense or if they're just hitting over them, which in some cases that's not a bad thing, but it kind of, like I was saying on Twitter, it kind of shows you what's the word I was going to use? It kind of shows you who's the real MVPs from just the power hitters. That's what I was saying. Yeah, the real MVPs from the power hitters, because there's this convention that you just need to hit power, you just need to be able to drive the ball, and then you'll be a great baseball player. And it's kind of true, but at the same time, being able to draw walks or steal bases significantly and avoid double plays, avoid being caught stealing, that's kind of an underrated skill that not every player has in their toolbox, and some guys do, like Judge, like Acuna, but a lot of guys don't. And I think that's what the stat kind of measures. It measures those guys that would not be highly rated otherwise, maybe as like a speed guy, leadoff guy. But yeah, so really that's offensive disruption. Maybe I'll do some more videos on it. Thank you for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe, and tune in next time for some more analytics.